Hello guys, my name is Kenton Park, and this is the series where we're going through the book of Proverbs. Today we're in chapter 5, and in the last video I talked about how Proverbs chapter 4 is the end of the opening section, and how now in Proverbs chapter 5 we start in a more development-like section. Whereas the first 4 chapters were continuously addressing the theme of knowing wisdom, this next section from 5 to about 11 is taking a more application approach. Now we're showing what it's like to actually live in wisdom, and we're going to cover many subjects in this. The first one up, we're going to talk about sexual morality. Yep, here we go. Christians and the church trying to control our sex lives again. Okay, yeah, so the church has had a long history of being pretty dogmatic about sexuality. And I don't want to pretend that's not important, it definitely is. But I'll definitely agree that the Bible has far more subjects that it talks about than justice. As for this book of Proverbs, as far as I know, there are only 3 chapters that really cover it as a main theme. There are 31 chapters in Proverbs, so 3 out of 31, that's less than 10%. There are many other subjects that we're going to get into. But for today, we're in sexual morality. So if I have not already turned you away from this video, let's get into the text. Proverbs chapter 5. Hear, my son, give attention to my wisdom, incline your ear to my understanding, that you may observe discretion, and your lips may reserve knowledge. For the lips of an adulteress drip honey, and smoother than oil is her speech. But in the end she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, her steps lay hold of Sheol. She does not ponder the paths of life. Her ways are unstable, she does not know it. Now then, my sons, listen to me, and do not depart from the words of my mouth. Keep your way far from her, and do not go near the door of her house, lest you give your vigor to others, and your years to the cruel one. Lest strangers be filled with your strength, and your hard-earned goods go to the house of an alien. And you groan at your latter end when your flesh and your body are consumed, and you say, How I have hated instruction, and my heart spurned reproof. And I have not listened to the voice of my teachers, nor inclined my ear to my instructors. I was almost in utter ruin in the midst of the assembly and congregation. Drink water from your own cistern, and fresh water from your own well. Should your springs be dispersed abroad, streams of water in the streets? Let them be yours alone, and not for strangers with you. Let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice in the wife of your youth. As a loving hind and graceful doe, let her breast satisfy you at all times. Be exhilarated always with her love. For why should you, my son, be exhilarated with an adulteress, and embrace the bosom of a foreigner? For the ways of a man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he watches all of his paths. His own iniquities will capture the wicked, and he will be held with the cords of his sin. He will die for lack of instruction, and in the greatness of his folly he will go astray. Alright, so did you catch that fluent transition from the talking about knowing wisdom into application? It starts out verses 1 and 2 talking about knowing wisdom, and then immediately transitions as a warning against adultery. In verse 3, it starts to describe an adulterous woman, or a loose woman who seduces men into sexuality. Now in later chapters, we're going to get much more into this kind of woman, but in this chapter, it's just jumping ahead to the consequences of it. Although she has elegant and enticing speech, she leads men astray. And when the man is led astray, it describes a series of sort of deaths that he inflicts from it. Realize how in verse 9 it talks about your vigor and your years going to the cruel one. This, I think, almost kind of implies a sense of youthfulness. Youthfulness is often asserted with a sense of strength, and it kind of acts as a parallel to the final chapter in Proverbs, Proverbs 31, verse 3, where it says, Do not give your strength to women. Furthermore, it talks about your hard-earned goods going to another person. This could imply the cost of a prostitute, as in these days, prostitution was legal. However, in modern application, it could also apply to the cost of child support. In either case, because a man is controlled by his sexuality, the fruit of his labor, the money that he gets from going to work, is going to another person. Thereby, not only is there a cost at his youthful health, but there's also a cost to his financial well-being. And then in verse 11, it further describes the physical cost of loose sexual living. This could be seen in things like STDs, which literally stands for sexually transmitted disease. You don't generally get sexually transmitted diseases for not having sex. It's like there's an argument, abstinence doesn't work. Yeah, it actually does work really well until a person decides to abandon it. And then in verse 14, there's a final cost, which is your social prestige. Now, there's a lot that can be said about a woman's sexual prestige and the derogatory terms that get thrown upon women for sleeping with men. But there is also a difficult balance that men often find. For many men to not be sexually active is kind of seen as disgraceful. But then if they're too sexually active, then that's also seen as disgraceful. To which sense, I am not at all saying be moderately active. But there are these four costs that we're seeing here. The youthfulness of a man, the earnings and money of a man, the health of a man, and the social standing of a man. Now, this final section is actually one of my favorite parts, and that's because of the poetic elements of it. There's a lot of context in what's going on in the Hebrew mindset here. Verse 15, drink water from your own cistern and fresh water from your own well. Should your springs be dispersed abroad, streams of water in the street? Let them be yours alone, and not for strangers with you. Let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice in the wife of your youth. Okay, that in English sounds like it's just suddenly bouncing all over the place. We are talking about loose women who entice us into sexual activity, and then all of a sudden we're talking about water. And then we're talking about our wives? What? This actually all flows much more fluently in the Hebrew mindset. This concept of cisterns and wells are allegory. And actually this is an allegory which kind of seems to be pretty common in human society. Almost all human societies from all eras have this metaphor of comparing water and sexuality, or thirst and sexual desire. In fact, sometimes we even still use it today, sometimes describing a person as thirsty if they're sexually desperate. That is exactly what's going on here. However, this is redirecting the focus of a young man. When you're feeling sexually thirsty, get your quenching from your wife. The Jewish narrative is actually that marriage is a really good thing. So this is less about chastity and waiting till marriage to have sex, and much more about, after you're married, staying faithful to your spouse in marriage. Now, the Bible, specifically the New Testament, does talk about chastity, but this text and most of the Old Testament actually refers much more about post-marriage fidelity. This is a call for a man to be faithful to his wife and not be sexually loose with other women outside of his marriage. It's termed in verse 16, should your springs be dispersed abroad, streams of water in the street. That might have implications to harlotry. When a man goes and buys a prostitute and she becomes pregnant, in those days they didn't really have means for child support or government-assisted living. So children who were born to prostitutes would kind of grow up on the streets. So the streams of water in the street could be referring to illegitimate children from an affair with a prostitute. But also in verse 18, it offers a blessing to marriage fidelity, that your fountain will be blessed, or that your sexual life will be blessed. Now, I myself am not married, but from what I've heard from many people who are married, there's an intimacy that comes with an undefiled marriage bed. I've kind of found it ironic listening to different people talk about sex. Some people who are really active in sex before marriage, or even with affairs in their marriage, they kind of complain how sex is never really that satisfying after all. Yeah, it's very attractive and desirable, but it just never leaves you satisfied. Even the Rolling Stones have a song about the logistics of that. Using these streams and waters as a sense for sexuality can also be seen in Song of Solomon chapter 8 verses 7. Many waters cannot quench love, nor will rivers overflow it. If a man were to give all of his riches of his household for love, it would be utterly despised. So many waters cannot quench love. That's saying many lovers cannot satisfy a sexual desire. There is no amount of sexual appeasement that can actually satisfy a man's craving. On the flip side, I've heard people who really honor their marriage covenant really talk about how enjoyable sex is. Sex just cannot be something that we use as a sense of greed and pleasure. It's got to be used as something to tie in and cement the relationship between a man and his wife. As Genesis 2:24 says, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and shall cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Or even the follow-up verse, the man and his wife were naked in the garden, and they were not ashamed. I've heard many Christians say that Adam and Eve in the garden, they just had this glow to them because they were perfect and holy. They had this glow that covered up their nakedness, and that's why they weren't ashamed. But once they sinned, that glow went away, and then they became ashamed. No, that's not what's going on here at all. It's that when there's an intimacy, there's not shame of your nakedness. So a man is encouraged to just live his life sexually free so that he can hope to find the satisfaction his soul desires. Instead, a man is called to get married, commit himself to his wife, and be faithful to one partner. That doesn't mean that you're going to find the perfect spouse and they're going to always satisfy you. That's not the purpose at all either. This is about living contentedly. No person is going to be able to satisfy you. it's got to be a choice to be content with the spouse that you have. Or for the single person, it's not about looking for that soulmate or that true love. Yes, be wise in whom you choose. Don't just settle for somebody, but get this idea out of your head that there's a perfect person for you somewhere out there, and that you're going to find your true fulfillment, your true meaning, your true purpose in life once you found them and married them. You're going to be left disappointed. Sure, there are some people that God brings together, people like Isaac and Rebekah, or Boaz and Ruth, but even those were not perfect situations. In Genesis 26, Isaac was not a very good husband to Rebekah, and even though Ruth and Boaz seem to be like the ideal marriage in the Bible, there was a lot of hardship and trial that led up to that. So anyway guys, thanks for watching. God bless.